true.
I remember saying to her, well, if you don't want to live there, there's not much point in getting married.
And I was desperate. No. I just said, fine.
And she said, no.
That all sounds like bullshit. Hello, this is Tony and Sheena Foy from Breaking Bread, and we have our good friends Martin and Mary Moran from Dublin, Ireland, here to talk about parenting and how best to bring our kids up in the faith.
Yeah.
When did we meet?
When did it all start?
I think it was, we went over to a conference, you and I went over to a conference in the UK.
We met at Curry Hills.
Okay.
I was representing the Nazareth community and you were in Net Ministries. And we kind of chatted about life, about faith, about Ireland.
Yeah.
And then we went to a Celebrate conference. I went with you, and that was the beginning of
a bromance.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, right?
And then you came on board with Net Ministries.
That's right.
Yeah, that was a really great time for us because you were, like this father figure to all our young missionaries. And you had experience with working with young men that we really didn't have.
Didn't know it was a thing.
You brought an awful lot of experience to the table. And I would say, never mind the experience, you brought love. Yeah. So we're going to cry in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah. And just so that people know who you are, a lot of people will know who you are already. You're the parents of 5 adult children. 4 of them are married. The 5th is getting married this October. And you also were members of the Nazareth community for many, many years. And tell us about the Nazareth community, if that's okay with you. You're also involved in other stuff as well, like Little Way Healing Ministries, and you're involved in the board of Net Ministries, Martin. Right. What is Nazareth community?
Well, I think Nazareth came to me first because it was a prayer meeting that became Nazareth. And so I was involved in the prayer meeting back in 84, 85. And actually it was 84, it became a community.
Were you married at this stage?
No, we hadn't met. So, excuse me. I was just going to a prayer meeting, and the prayer meeting developed from a group that were involved in Teams for a Lady.
Oh, yeah.
And they said they had nothing for their kids. It was fine for couples. And so I just was part of that prayer meeting, and it developed into what is now the Nazareth community. And so that was, they made the covenant community commitment in 84. And
what does that mean, a covenant commitment?
Yeah, that means that more than a prayer meeting, that people decided to get together and commit themselves, excuse me, to at least a year at first, but to commit themselves to one another, not to just not turn up on the next prayer meeting, but that they were there for one another. And they were particularly wanted to develop family relationships. So they were intentional about what they needed. I was single at the time, and I was coming and going and thought, I'm not just going to be a babysitter here. I'll take my time. That was in 85, I met Martin. And so that's a whole other story about how we met and where our community came involved. Martin was looking for community.
Well, I met community first in Australia. I've been in the seminary for a number of years, without a doubt. In fact, 4 years. And I went to Perth in Australia to work with a priest.
So just before you go on, when you say without a doubt, you didn't have a doubt about your priesthood?
No. I came to faith at 22, and at 25, I went into the seminary. I came to faith because somebody knocked on my door who wasn't Catholic, bought me my first Bible, and a year later, I came back into the Catholic Church because I saw something on television. It was a prayer meeting, and it looked a bit strange, but there were Catholics with Bibles, and I didn't know any Catholic in Ireland with the Bible, unless it was gathering dust in a cupboard somewhere. And that led me to that. But I after 4 years, I went to Australia to work in a parish with a priest who was from home.
As part of your seminary training?
Well, no, it was voluntary in my part. And in the part was a lay charismatic community. And there I saw married men in ministry, leading groups. And I thought, I would never be in a seminary if I had seen this. So I spent a year in discernment whether I should be continuing or not. And it was a massive decision it was either priesthood or covenant community.
Okay, so that sounds like a massive move, but we still don't know what about the charismatic community that you saw in Australia that was so impactful. So lay men in ministry. Let's break that down. Give us an example of one incident that happened what was the most powerful thing that you saw that actually led you to change your mind? And
No pressure, Martin.
yeah, I know, I've heard the story before, so I know there's a story there.
Yeah, there were a number of things. It was the men. I felt it's a terrible thing to say, but they were real men. They were able to talk about God and also confront you. I was a younger guy, and challenge me. But I remember one night being with a family of 7 children, and they were for 5 months up to the age of 15. And it was what they did, and we have done this for years now, on a Saturday night to have what's called a Sabbath meal or a Lord's Day meal. It's like a Jewish tradition. And at one part of it, you go around the table with prayer. And this 8-year-old child, Patrick Horgan, asked God to bless Martin while he's in Australia without any prompt. And I'm looking at this family and I'm saying, I don't come from a bad family, but I've never seen a family function like this. So on the one hand, I saw men who were really in the role, so respectfully leading their families. And then the witness. Another incident in another house one night where I saw a mother during that prayer where they would go around the table, and she turned to her 8-year-old daughter and said, Laura, will you forgive me for the way I spoke to you today? Now, there was no grandiose, there was no, they weren't protecting their family as being perfect. They were being real. And I didn't experience that before. And there was faith there. Anyway, it was a powerful experience. Go on.
Yeah, and just to be clear, when you say that these men were in ministry, I'm assuming the women were in ministry as well in their respective areas. Did that mean that they were full-time ministers, for want of a better way of putting it, or what? How does that work?
There were a couple of full-time people in the community, but generally it was families. And what impressed me was that even though kids would be going through the normal struggles in teenage years, they were holding on to faith and they were very confident. I envied them, the confidence that I saw. And I thought, this is the way we're meant to be rearing kids. And,
confident in who they were, in their identity.
Yeah.
So mums and dads were working in secular jobs. That's
mostly,
were they, or were
women
they
were
not?
mostly, that was 1984. So women were full-time mothers that I would have seen. And there were a lot of single people who'd had various types of careers, from janitors to doctors to psychiatrists. That would be the spread.
Okay. So that was a big turning point. And that's what led you to community, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
I felt that you couldn't authentically live the Christian life without coming together with people of like mind in order to be strong and to live life to the full. It's not something. This was liberation for me. This wasn't confining in any way, but how authentic the relationships were and how real people. It's none of this slapping on the back. How are you? And we put up a show.
Yeah.
People could talk from the heart.
Yeah.
And then I met my wife, and that was the big thing.
Well, when Martin came back and we happened to meet on retreat together, I was now involved in, to some extent, I didn't make a covenant commitment like the other people had done, which you didn't have to. So I just tagged along. And then we met in 85, and Martin was talking about his experience that he came home with from Australia. And I said, well, I'm involved in a prayer meeting that has become a community in Ireland. And he happened to know it through having visited another time. So that was our common bond of our vision for our life. We knew that, you do need other people to support you. You can't do it on your own. And that was our foundation or our basis for being intentionally moving to where we did come to live. Our decision to live among those who had already began in this community, Nazareth, wasn't one I wanted to do at the first place. I met somebody from the West. I'm from Dublin. I always wanted to live in the country, right? So I thought, this is great.
But you hate the rain.
Well, I wouldn't have come to Donegal, maybe, or the far west, but still.
You mean the sunny north?
I think people from Dublin thinks it's the centre of the universe. I say it to our kids all the time.
It's certainly a warmer one. So when Martin we were talking about marriage and family and where we'd live, and he at the time was living and working in the West. I had thought we would go either West or Midlands or someplace neutral, but not where we were. And he said, well, this is where community is. This is where we need to plant yourself. And I thought, no.
It's the only row we had when we were engaged. I remember Mary saying once, I don't want to live in a cluster where everybody knows everything. Now, I had experienced cluster in Australia, and I knew that wasn't the case. People lived in their own homes, and yes, you had more interaction. But I remember saying to her, well, if you want to live there, there's not much point in getting married.
And I was desperate. No, I just said, fine. And interestingly, I left Martin to the bus station going back that evening, and I went, as I always did, to pray in this little oratory close by my place. And I had this, such an audible message given to me then, that Martin was trying to look for work in Dublin. I'd hoped he wouldn't get the work in Dublin because he had a good job in the West. And I heard this internal voice to say that he wouldn't open a job for Martin in Dublin unless I said yes. And it was my decision to say yes. And I was so moved by this. It was a particular icon that spoke to me on the wall. And it was one where Jesus was holding out his hand, and he was standing on this very shaky ground with kind of a hole and a cross on it. And he was just reaching out to say, yes, it does look dicey. You don't know what the future is, but say yes. So I went home. We were in the era where there were no mobile phones. So I wrote to him and said yes. And he got that a couple of days later, and he got an interview on the Friday. That was a Monday. I sent that off. And he had an interview in Dublin on Friday, and he got that job. Wow. And that spoke hugely to me about not our own will, but God has that plan. And we need to be, I wasn't clued into it. I was wanting my own way, and I can see now, looking back, we're 37 years married now. I can see looking back how important it was. We're still in the same place. Mm-hmm. We bought into where community was, where there were 2 or 3 other families. Now that I think it became up to 18 families in that area, because people saw the advantage of having the people around you. And
something I've noticed as well is, so there's the Nazareth community, the people who've signed up, and then there's a whole bunch of families that are on the periphery of that. Yeah. And it's, it has, now maybe this is me looking at it through rose-tinted glasses, but who have been affected in a positive way. And certainly that's my impression of it. Now, the thing that I would say from looking at you guys, there's one word that I would say that would separate your experience of your early years and your marriage in comparison to Sheena and I, who, grew up normal Catholics in Ireland, I would say. And Sheena, please disagree with me if you disagree with me, because we haven't, Sheena doesn't know what I'm going to say.
No.
But the one word that I would say that would distinguish your experience as a married couple, because of your involvement at the time in the community, would be formation. Like, for some reason, you guys, by whatever avenue, through your association with the community, received a lot of formation that has clearly made you exceptional people. Not just exceptional Christians and not just exceptional Catholics.
It's funny, I would use another F word, and that would be fellowship. That you've had other people to do life with who speak the same language, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I remember a man before we got married saying, I'll give you, and he was married 23 years, and he said, never let the sun set on your anger. And he talked to me about that. So after communion in the church, we whispered those words to one another, that we wouldn't let the sun set on our anger. If there was an issue and we couldn't work through it, as there was a few times where we said, okay, we're going to shelf it and talk about it in the morning. That way, resentment doesn't get a chance to build up. And you talk about fellowship. We got married. Now, I'm very extrovert out there. Mary is quiet. She'd be introvert. And the girls from work they put up a request for Mary to sing. And I go over to Mary and I say...
At our wedding, you're talking.
Yeah, at our wedding, yeah.
That was
at our
the
wedding.
days when one did that.
Yeah. And so I went over to Mary and I was saying, go on, go up, go on. And she says, Martin, I will not go up. And I kept kind of really pushing her. Next thing I got a tap on the shoulder from this man, Kevin Toomey, God rest him. And he said, Martin, can I speak to you for a moment? Now, I'm married about 5 hours, maybe less. And he said, the first duty of a husband is to protect his wife. Whack. And I wasn't offended. I thought, he's actually right. Wow. And I thought, for him to have the courage to speak into my life like that, he didn't know how I was going to respond to it, but he was going to do what I should be doing, protecting my wife. But it was a big lesson. So yes, I think people speaking into our lives, giving the hard word at times, yes, the encouraging word too. I'd say, Mary, you would say the same.
Well, for me, it was that fellowship you talked of, because the like-mindedness of people, when I was working, you were always fighting against people who didn't quite understand what you're about. And these people who could speak into your life and have fellowship and have fun. I remember when we moved into our house, there was one of the girls who just had married a few years earlier than us and had 2 children. The house next door came for sale. And we said to them, would you kind of pray about maybe next door? Oh, in the shop they bought. And they're still there today. But that friendship, if because we had children growing up together, that fellowship and friendship that we shared, we went on holidays together. I went in crying to her, not understanding whatever. When I had a child sick, I said, what's this? That kind of understanding, but also to pray together and say, okay, let's pray about that now. Or the support, getting meals when you weren't well. And that fellowship for me, because I didn't grow up with it. I was the only girl growing in a family, and I was very withdrawn, and so I didn't have this huge, bunch of friends that I could relate to, and I resisted that. That was my resistance to. If we lived here and people were in your face and you had to face these things, I don't know. I want to kind of run from that. But that was the best thing for me, just to have that encounter with like-minded women.
It's fantastic. It's almost like what you would see in Southern Baptist, if there is such a thing as a Southern Baptist in a film in America, and even in a Christian film, but it's so very not Irish. But it's so very positive as well. It's...
I think it's the way we're meant to live, isn't it?
There were challenging times too. I don't want to paint it all as...
Of course.
Life.
I just didn't like people, and you had to face...
and they might not have liked you either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there wasn't... I don't want to paint it unrealistically. There were challenges towards...
but it was a great environment to grow our kids.
Yeah.
I remember... one guy saying about, this man was with YWAM for years, Rob Clark, he said, it's their relationships. He said, New Zealand?
Yeah.
He said, it's the relationships those kids will have growing up. It's and the friendships that they have that will really help them launch them into faith, rather than just being told different things. They were experiencing life together in a very positive way.
Yeah. And it's when... as parents, we aspire that our kids would, embrace the faith that we have. But at the end of the day, It's their decision to do it. And it's really when, you know, they have like-minded friends, it's not weird then, you know, it's just normal to
And you're part of a gang as well.
Yeah, and there's the intergenerational aspect to it. I remember meeting a young man who joined the community, and he had never socialized with anybody older or younger than him. It was always his peers, and what he couldn't, seeing grandparents relating to somebody else's child, he never saw that intergenerational thing going on. And I think for people in their teens, both boys and girls, it's just somebody a little bit older than them to be somebody they can aspire to be like.
Well, there's a younger couple that were, I don't know, what are they, 10 years younger than us, maybe 15. And they were married and beginning a family. But our kids, as they grew up in their early teens particularly, would talk to them rather than us.
Yeah.
You know, obviously we were not cool. The parents.
Yes. Yeah.
But we knew they were going to be saying the same thing.
Exactly. That you're off the same hymn sheet.
Yeah. And they would take it from them, and they'd say, "Oh, guess what? You know, and I learned this," and we'd smile away and saying, "Gosh, that's wonderful." We knew it wouldn't be us, so it does, as they say, take the village.
I don't consider myself old, and when I relate this story, it'll not peg me into any particular age bracket. But I met one of the founders of the community, Anna Johnson, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, but he's an incredible man, really an incredible man. And I met him recently, and I was reminded of it. But I was going to some conference that was before I was involved full time with Net Ministries, and I went to this conference, was on my own, got chatting to this guy, and we strike up a conversation. And he says to me, "Gosh, aren't you a fine man?" Now, nobody had ever said that to me in my life before. Nobody had ever said that to me in my life before. And I feel like crying talking about it. And it's not that my father told me he loved me. He told me he was proud of me. But it was the way that I was sat down, had a chat with this man who had only just got to know me. We were chatting maybe half an hour. "Aren't you a fine man?"
Gosh,
and I'll always remember
the importance of speaking blessing
Yeah,
over
a
people.
father's
You're very
blessing.
strong about that, Martin, aren't you?
Yeah, I didn't experience once in our local cash and carry. I was going, it was a Saturday morning, and there was an elderly lady in front of me, and this guy that was on the till, because you're standing up and you're moving stuff on trolleys. And he was brilliant with this lady, this elderly lady, and I felt I really need to affirm him and say he's done such a great job. And I thought, no, not going to. And I felt this like a voice or my heart speak. You can carry this blessing out in your pocket, or you can bless that young man. And when I got to him, I told him, I said, really impressed the way that you looked after that lady. And he got all embarrassed. And he says, "I'm telling my ma that when I go home today."
Yeah.
And that was a lesson to me about if something is on your heart, you can hold it there, or you can speak it and bless somebody. So it's I find it a very easy thing to do.
It's funny. Who was I saying this to somebody the other day? I read it somewhere, or I listened to it on a podcast, or somebody was here. But they were talking about somebody that they worked with. Now, I think it was a priest, but I can't remember. But they travelled everywhere with this man. And every single server or waitress or cashier, he spoke blessing into every single one of them. And it, like that, I was just like, you know, where are the opportunities for me to do that? And yesterday I was in town, and there was this girl behind the counter, and she had the most beautiful, deep speaking voice, you know, like, and a really thick Donegal accent. And I said, "God, has anyone ever said you have a voice for radio? You have a lovely, I could listen to you all day." Well, she was chuffed. So we can find
Absolutely.
blessing in anything. And as you say, the courage to just speak it out, you know. It all depends on the mood you're in as well.
Well, Martin is good at that. I'm much quieter and shyer about doing that, because I think, oh gosh, what's the response you might get, and then deal with that kind of thing. But I have found those kind of things, just saying, I love your jacket. Something just small, especially where I'm, find myself, which is usually in the checkout or someplace. You don't have to be out there in where you're not naturally. It's wherever
it's your everyday life. Yeah.
And sometimes that's the kids, or it's somebody across the road, or the postman, or it takes effort, and you have to think about it. Doesn't come natural to me.
I'm not saying I'm great, and this is not me. You know me, so you know I'm not great.
Before you say it, I know what you're going to say, and I was about to say, Tony speaks blessings over our kids all the time. Is that what you were going to say?
I do, yeah. And not that I do it. I do it intentionally. I do it sincerely. It's a habit I've gotten into, and it comes very naturally to me now at this stage. And I almost feel like it's a gushing thing sometimes, but it's I think it's the Holy Spirit. But also then when it comes to, my kids are very secure, and they know their daddy loves them. They know their daddy thinks they're great.
Yeah.
And they know their daddy's batting for them, and they know he's proud of them. So when I do have to speak into their lives and say, okay, look, we need to have a conversation about the way that you're living this particular area of their lives, they know that I have their back, and it's out of love that I'm actually coming to them. And it's the same with the staff in Net Ministries. It's the same with the missionaries as well, that I have less contact with, but more with the staff and the mission staff, that they're secure, because I try to find something that I can affirm them in. And then when it comes to saying, look, maybe you could have looked at that from a different angle, and it might have worked out. And they have the permission as well. And that's part of the culture of Net Ministries. And so our kids have as well, the permission to, while it's uncomfortable, the permission to actually say, you know what, when you said that was something that really hurt me, or you really messed up there. Here's why. Do you know?
The importance of that foundation, because we have found in the ministry we're in, Little Way Healing Ministry, when people come for prayer and they talk about their childhood, and some of it is horrific stuff, okay, but a lot of it is the simple things that I wasn't seen. I was never told that. I wasn't given the space or given the time, and the effects that have on them. They're searching for that time, that hug, in all maybe inappropriate ways, but it comes back to that foundational blessing of a parent, particularly a father. And so that of all the things, giving time, enjoying the scribbling, colouring, whatever it is that a child needs, that's faith alive, because for them, you are God. It's their first experience of love and acceptance. And that to me is, you couldn't do better than what you're talking about.
And I can also think, just in case anybody thinks I'm great, I can think of two incidences when Martin spoke into my parenting of my kids, and but it made me aware of, and I often think of, I don't think of Martin when I think of it, but I think of the things I'm reminded of. Oh yeah, that's something I need to work on. It's something that I just have to. I have to keep at it, keep trying, because we're not good at everything. We're not the finished product. We won't be until we die, and we've got to allow people the permission to actually say, look, tell me how I can do better.
Yeah, but also like if there's people listening to this and they're thinking, it's not natural for me. Like, it's not natural for me to do what you do, and I think it's just something you have to practice. And I am still that person working in progress, but I do sometimes think it's harder for mammies, because we're busy. We're busy kind of, a lot of the time, that and that's not making an excuse for myself, but it's just
your brains function differently.
Yeah.
A part of our role is to encourage, and part of your role is to organize.
But do you think that the roles are different? And I know from our kids, if they came home from school and the fire was on, oh my goodness, how often have they said how fabulous that is? And to this day, they will come and say, or maybe ring ahead and say, I'm just coming in is the fire on? So it's that simple. It's making the home.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to be stereotyping roles, because in today's world, I was blessed to be able to be at home.
But
That's not the case now.
Yeah, but I think
lot of
there's another element here. It is bringing the communication into a level of intimacy. And I remember when I was growing up, and I come from a family of 6 boys and the youngest a girl. And my sister was about 14, and she really was going through whatever. And my mother was really angry with her. And I remember she stormed upstairs, and I said to my mother, "Have you told Breda that you love her since she was a child?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Why do we goo and ga with babies and tell them all sorts of things, but when a child needs to be hearing it consistently throughout their life?" And I remember the next morning, we were sitting having breakfast, just my mother, my sister and myself, and the atmosphere you could cut with a knife. And I remember throwing my knife and fork on the table, and I said, "Want to pray here?" And I just said a quick prayer about just bringing harmony in the family. And there were tears. And for the first time, like, they were able to hug, not the first time, they were able to hug one another, but break down the barriers in order to be able to speak intimately. Like for Aina Johnson to say to you, "You're a fine man," that was intimacy. And most of us shy away from speaking like that. But it's so important.
We're generally afraid to say it, but we're also unable to receive it. Especially as Irish people. Now, at that stage, I was secure enough in myself to be able to receive it from him. And he'd also, like, he had also earned the right to speak into my life. And I respected it. Like, he knew me well enough, even though he only knew me for a half an hour, he knew me well enough to know or to think certainly that I was a fine man. But I knew he genuinely thought it. Do you know what I mean? It was a sincere.
Well, you just been speaking from your heart, Tony, and that's where we reveal really who we are. That's where we get to know a person. That's why I got to know this lady. I knew I'd marry her. The second day I heard her speak, all I needed to know, she had a sense of humour because she exposed her heart. And you could be dating somebody for a long time, and you're cautious about everything. And so I think when we speak from our heart, we show who we really are.
It's one of the 7 levels of intimacy. What do you call it? Matthew Kelly wrote a book, 7 Levels of Intimacy. I don't know if you've read it, but it's a fabulous book. And one of the things I read about it was that some people just can't, they find it really, really difficult to go there, and they've got to know you a long time before they will go there with you. And then there's the whole idea that if I let people know who I really am and all my insecurities and all who I think I am, even though that's not who I am, but in that place, if we don't get a chance to talk about it, if I let people in to see the real me, they're not going to like me. The reality is that when people know the real me and I'm vulnerable enough to actually I have this, this moment of courage, that 1 second of courage that I just say, stuff it. I'm just going to say what's really going on with me. People can't, but they just can't help themselves. That's the way we're made. We're drawn to another person's ability to be really brutally honest about themselves.
Would you agree? I don't know if I 100% agree.
What? Tell me what you don't agree with.
I agree from the perspective that, yes, I would be very drawn to people who are vulnerable, and I love when someone can take my heart and hold it. I feel so loved. But I also know that there are people who can't hold my heart. They're just not in a place where they can cope with that, and I think Matthew Kelly talks about that too, that even though you may have a relationship with somebody for all your life, they actually can't hold your heart because it's just not a language that they speak.
But
Yeah, I think I'll let you speak, and then I'll speak about what what I meant. And just to clarify, and I don't take back what I said at all, even though you disagree with me, but I'll clarify what I meant.
I think we all have a story, and it's going way back there. And it's amazing how we can be paralyzed in not being able to hold somebody's heart. And often it's coming from our own childhood with what we have experienced and how we handle life, because we're not set free from we're carrying burdens. Often what we've experienced a lot in Little Way Healing Ministries is even hurts in children going back to the age of 3, something a parent said or wasn't there for a child or whatever, and there's a wall built up. And unless that is broken open, where they begin to forgive the parent for not being, and it's usually with parents. And I know that from my own experience, having a really massive father wound that wasn't healed until I was in my 20s, because my father was a big, tall man. He could work physically. I was 5'8", and he let me know that a lot. And I believed in a lie about who I was until I began to discover that what makes the man is the heart that's inside him. It's nothing to do with physical size. So we all have a story.
Really. I don't know if you want to go there, but I think it might be helpful for people, and I'll share what I meant about vulnerability, which is really what we're talking about here. I don't know if you want to give people an idea of, without disparaging your dad, who you love the sort of things that he would say, so that people have an idea of the sense of the relationship between himself and yourself, and this. Do you want to share any of that? Well,
he would have been typical product of his own environment, number one, but also at that stage there was no intimacy, but because whatever the lack that was in his life, he criticised me an awful lot. And I actually never played football because of that. I was never encouraged to go out there. You have what it takes. I started playing football when I was in my early 20s and loved it. Like, what a waste. But there were massive hurts there. There was also alcohol difficulty in the house, and that was the only issue. But that made me recoil into myself in some ways. The other side, the positive side, is I made a decision when I was quite young. I would never abuse alcohol, and I haven't. And that was a great learning for me. And despite, I think, all the lacks that were in my life, because of God's intervention and nothing else, and having the right people around, I feel I've done a very good job in parenting. Yes, I've had to apologise to my kids many times, and I'm not perfect, but overall, I feel we're determined where we're going and the vision we have going forward in life, rather than being stuck where we've come from. I don't know what you'd say on that, Mary.
So just to clarify back in terms of we're and this is not to close off this part of the conversation. We're just having a chat here, but in terms of what I mean and what Sheena means, good that Sheena clarified, in the appropriate circumstances. And you two are involved in Little Healing Way Ministry, and we have conversations like this all the time. So between the four of us, we talk about this sort of thing all the time. But the impact of just the stuff that we carry on and we never talk about, and we have this, sometimes we have an idea of who we are which is totally distorted. That's not really who we are. And we think if we tell people who we are, and there's an appropriate time to actually talk about that, and that is with the likes of yourselves in an appropriate setting. And a lot of the work that we do with missionaries, before they can go deeper in their relationship with the Lord, is to give them a sense of who God really is, not who they think he is. Because they may have a head knowledge of who they think he is, but that may not have gone the journey all the way to the heart. So they haven't reflected on it. There's still a sense there that God is, he's a judge before all else. He's the accuser, which is the opposite of, that's the enemy. That God is an accusing God, that he's out there to find fault. He's going to catch them out. And like, who wants to love a God like that? Who wants to serve a God like that? Jesus certainly wasn't like that. But somehow we believe that deep down inside of us, that that's who he actually is, until we're exposed to the reality of who he actually is. And that takes time and work and all of that. But because we think God is a condemning God, we have this sense of ourselves which is condemned, which is not good.
But it's there's also a huge misperception as to who we are and where we get our identity, and that we are actually sons and daughters of God, and we all seek to attach ourselves to something, to find our identity in who we are. But if we just stay on that level and remember who we are in Christ, then drop the mic, everything else is okay.
Yeah, one of the things, though, I learned about that is I grew up with, you should love the Lord your God with your whole heart and mind and soul. And I was good parents, good family, but I learned the theory of it. I could never... I didn't know this till a long time later, but it was harsh. It wasn't the loving, carefree, give me time and enjoy the fun of being who I am. I didn't know who I am, but the identity part you're talking of, I did a program a couple of years ago called Power to Choose. And it's based on the 12 steps of the AA program, but the Christianized version of it. And one of the things in it says, don't believe anything you don't believe. And that, I questioned myself on that. Do I really believe that God loves me and would like to spend fun time with me, etc., etc.? It challenged me to pare back what do you really believe. What is the one you can stand on and say, well, I'm not sure about all those other things, but this I do. And it took me a long time. Thankfully it was during COVID and I had the time. But it took me a long time to ask myself, it says love your neighbour as yourself. And I was trying to love outside of that and not knowing how to do it, just being a good girl, doing the right things, pleasing others. If everybody else was happy, therefore would be okay. All of those things. Now, I didn't realize I was doing all that. This was something that was a very sort of very subtle and low key in my life. But when I was faced with that question, I had to say, if I said, God, I don't know whether you love me, would I be turned to a pillar of salt now? Would that be wrong? After all, you're so grateful and you've done all this. But what I recognized as I went through that program was these voices, these thoughts, these lies were based on experience. And it was very evident to me that I needed to know God from a place of security and love and care. And I didn't have to be the out, like Martin, as you well know, is real social. I'm not. And I was comparing, I should be out there doing this. I should be telling others, God exists. But it wasn't the true me. And only when I realized, not only was I paring back to ask the question, but I had to get the healing attached to all that. I had to become honest with myself. There are so many parts within this. Not all of me was like this. There's a part of me felt this. A part of me, when you talk to somebody and you say, and you're talking away for a while and you say, okay, let me be honest. So you have to go a few layers. Mm-hmm. And I've learned, you spoke about honesty earlier, and that speaks hugely to me. And one of the biggest things I can remember in my understanding of this and healing about this was, Martin won't mind me sharing this.
I don't know what you're going to share.
I know I've shared it before, which was when we were married first, we always had a date. Every week, every Friday, we did date nights. And that was when the kids were young. It was just at home ourselves. We didn't have money to get babysitter or whatever. We took a takeaway in and that kind of thing. And we always had an Indian because we loved Indian. But now roll on, 15, 20 years or something. And I'm realizing I don't like Indian. Now, why? The only reason I knew that is I was saying this to somebody in this this program I was doing, and I was saying, well, who am I really, and what do I really want? And it was, would you buy an Indian if you're out? Would you go to an Indian restaurant or never? So why do you do it? Because Martin likes it. And that wasn't that lovely? But I didn't realise I wasn't included in with where, what was I doing there? I was making sure he was happy. If he was happy, all was well, all was calm. So when I came back and said, Martin, I need to talk to you about something, and he kind of wondered what on earth was I going to say. And I said, I just need to say, because we were going on at one of these dates, I don't like Indian. I said, well, why did you have it? I would cope with anything that was put up with me.
It sounds like that. And my wife was she bowed all the time to me, and she kept me at it.
Sheena does that for me.
It's really surprised me because Mary is no pushover. But it's interesting that she became really in touch with her inner self, with her who she was, and I thought it was great.
But I had to let go of the expectations of myself for myself.
Yes.
So when you talk about others in the appropriate situation, given you being intimate, I couldn't even be intimate with me. If somebody had said, you're a lovely person, I'd make some fun, stupid remark back because I couldn't take it, or I wouldn't believe them, or what was now the next but. Or what are you looking for? So I had so many, veins going in all the different directions, that it was only when I realised until you can heal what the foundational stuff I didn't get. We say every time at Mass what was done and what was failed to do, what I've done and what I failed to do, and often for me it was what was failed to be done for me in my needs. So that intimacy and that honesty is where the Lord wants us, I think, to know, but we have to start with ourselves.
So would you guys tell us a little bit more about Little Way Ministries? How did you get into it? And what does it really mean?
Right. Okay, well, about, I think it was in 2016, after Christmas or around about Christmas, I was in a low place and I Googled healing ministries and I came across this. But I knew there were so many off-the-wall things out there too. I checked it with a friend I believe would have known. And he said to me, well, I can tell you somebody who has done it and you can check. And I would certainly trust they would know good about this. So I did. And she said, look, my husband did it and he came home. I hardly recognised him. His face had changed even. She said, do it. Now, so that was in January. And when I looked at it, I could have done it in the UK because it's about 25 years, I think, established in the UK. This was, there was one course happening, this healing course. It's a week-long course, and it was happening in May in Sligo. And I thought, okay, I'll do it in May. But of course, when I got to about April and the sun came out, I was good again and I did not want to do it.
But you did it. You did it.
I did it because I was forced to go.
No, you weren't. You signed up for it. Let me take it from there. Mary went on this and I knew this was going to be a journey of going right in there to what was in there. And we had one conversation, I think probably on the Sunday night. She got there on a Sunday. And I said, I didn't want her ringing me during the week to start bouncing things off me because I wasn't part of the program and it wouldn't be fair on her. And I knew it would be painful. So I picked her up the following Sunday and she sat into the car. And I never saw my wife so free in our, whatever it was, 30 years of marriage. Wow. There was something so alive in her. And it was all about dealing with the past.
It was all about meeting Jesus. in a personal way. Now, I would have said, I knew Jesus personally. I was in charismatic renewal. I was in community for all those years. But I realized, no, I was living somebody else's story. And if, when a child might come into you and say, I hate you, Mummy. And the answer could be back, you can't speak to me like that. Get up to your bedroom till your dad comes in or something. Or you could say, what's going on? Why? What's really behind that? That's not like you. And that's what I had to do for myself. And that's what was done for me during that week. It was okay to feel angry, annoyed, bitter, whatever it was you felt. It was okay. Now let Jesus talk to you.
Yeah, and
it's a very intimate, it's a very individual, intimate thing. So I did that and came home, and that's what Martin encountered. It freed me to love myself, love what Jesus loved in me. And I had this beautiful relationship. I met him in a way that I had never done before. Still that way. I can still meet him. And then...
Yeah, I decided I'm doing this course. And so I went to the UK with 3 other men, and I did the course. And, we've been involved in ministry in some ways or another, in leading groups and doing some marriage programs and learning all the time from other people who are older and wiser than us. But in coming across this ministry, I thought, this is really the two-edged sword ministry. It's so sound. There's such good parameters of how to operate within it, because it's a system. It's not just you pray with somebody and it's depending on words you get or sense. It's nothing about that. It's stuff been revealed to the person who's being ministered to. And for me, in dealing with all the wounds of my childhood, and particularly the father wound, was honestly, I can only describe it as everything that the locust had eaten had been restored 100-fold. That's the only way I can describe it. And to the extent that that's our main ministry now for the rest of our life, really. Because when you come across somebody, as I was, in some way chained in some aspects of my life, and all of a sudden, they're all broken. It's just a mighty freedom.
So the chains are broken, not the person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And for 2 of our daughters, when we asked our eldest daughter, we said, look, will you do this? And she did it. And then our youngest daughter, before she married, we said, we'd love you to do this. We'll give you it as a gift, because we don't want you carrying anything from us, your family of origin, into your marriage. And it was just a great blessing to her, may like it or not, our kids are going to experience pain with us as good as we may think we are.
Of course.
Absolutely. And yeah.
So the ministry has developed over the last few years in Ireland particularly. So there used to be 1 course, now there are 2 courses in the year. And literally they have sold out the day they go online.
So when you say a course, normally... I'm thinking you're going on the course to learn how to be.
Well, it is a foundational course. So like us, it is a foundational course of learning the ministry, learning how it operates. But it also is for your own healing, because you have to be healed first before you can do that to anybody else. So it is both. Okay. And to some people go and they just want to receive healing for themselves, and they're not able, or it's just not something they discern at the end of it. So we felt, we want to give back. We want to learn more, and so we went to the UK over the years after that to further training. Okay. So the week it's a week course, and I remember thinking, how on earth would you want a week? What would you do in a whole week for praying? I laugh at that now, because I can see how important it was, because it took me, I fought and screamed for 3 or 4 days. I just wasn't going to give in to anybody.
3 or 4 days during the retreat, or during the program.
If I could have left, I would have. I had no car to go from there. So it showed me the fight within that
resistance.
Yeah. And it was where
which is a good sign.
Yeah, for me, it was me. For others were saying, I'm here for the healing, hand up straight away, give me whatever I need to get.
Just to explain another thing of it, it's okay, people do the course, as Mary said, and some people from that may feel called into ministry, and that will be a discerning process with the Little Way UK, whom we work with, and essentially we're under. But also then as people grow in the ministry and are, you're monitored very much on how you're operating, and so then people would be sanctioned or approved to pray under the Little Way banner, as it is. So people would come for prayer, which may be 2 or 3 hours, but it's not all praying. It's just leading different aspects of it, where God is revealing real things to the person who's being ministered to. Often somebody will have a memory that was buried, and the healing that comes through from that through the process. So there's the course, and then there's also people who, and please God, in the next few years there will be people around Ireland who people can go to. Like a lot of people used to go to Scotland to somebody to be prayed with.
But I think one of the important things too, after you do this course, you're offered a cell group, if you want to join, so that you can have further prayer, you can chat more about this. And you fellowship.
Yes.
So without divulging any identity, can you give me an example of somebody who experienced healing through the Little Way? Or is that something that, you're not going to reveal anybody's name, or something that yourself happened to either of yourselves, say, for example, that's appropriate to disclose?
There is a book called Little Way Healing Ministries. It can be got online.
I have it upstairs. It's my next read.
Really?
Well,
But there's loads of testimonies in that. But I remember somebody who came on the course, and I remember speaking to this person and saying, "How did you sleep last night?" And said, "I get to sleep around 3 and I'm awoke 5:30 every day for the last 3 years." Gosh. And from the first intervention, but for the first prayer session that person had every night, 8 hours after that. And that was 3 years from whatever the anxiety was for that person. But it went back in to minister, and that's not something that
I would describe it. I mean, I can give you my own story, but I would describe it as what you see in your own life now, what triggers you now, is the starting point. If somebody doesn't have an instant memory, or they feel I'm really caught in that direction. And you just ask them, well, what is it that you react to now, or trips you up, or what is it? Because I guarantee you that will go back.
Yeah,
because we're all the time trying to solve it ourselves and living out of that deficit that wasn't given. But we don't come up with the answers. It's the Holy Spirit that will give that to that person. You just allow the atmosphere to be there. And
I could give an example.
There's always two people praying too.
Yeah, I could give an example in my own life, because from a very young age, the smell of alcohol and booze from somebody. If I was in a situation, even as an adult now, and where somebody is sloppy with drink and stupid, the kind of stuff that I would have experienced as a child, immediately I'm brought back to my childhood, and I want to get away from that situation. So that would have been the root, and here's the fruit today. It just has so much. You know how like a smell will take you back to a memory. Oh gosh, and that was a smell, but it brings all the memory back. But I'm able to cope with, say, all of that stuff I have forgiven, which was the key thing for me, to forgive my father for that. But it also, I think the big thing was, when you're a child and if you're in a dysfunctional situation, as ours would have been, you don't have a voice to actually speak what's inside you. But then in this healing ministry, that child is given the voice to be able to speak to the person that has hurt them, the perpetrator. And it's very powerful.
It sounds very like transformational prayer ministry,
Yeah,
which we've done a bit of training in, where it's really, finding the root of a lie-based truth that you believe about yourself,
right,
which affects the way you behave. And when you think of the freedom that that people can gain from being healed, why aren't we all queuing up?
Yeah.
Which is my next question: is how do people avail of it? Do they make an appointment with you, or is it through a website? Or
It's through a website.
There is a website.
Little Way Healing
It's a
Ministries.
very good website.
.co.uk or
Just if you Google Little Way Healing Ministries.
.com, I think. Little Way Healing Ministries will get you there.
Okay.
They actually, when COVID came and everything stopped, they went online, did Zoom calls, and it still exists. And so twice a month, in fact, there is in some months 3 times, but twice a month there is a whole healing night where anybody can join. You don't have to be in the ministry. It can be anybody at all, and just come. And the founders, which was a priest, an Irish priest, Father Lawrence Brazel. He's now, an very elderly man, and there was a lady was a widow, became a widow. They were thrown together, if you like. They crossed paths in prayer ministry, and they just little by little this developed from that 25, 26 years ago now. And I think what everybody, when you look at the testimonials in the book, and for others who you hear online on the Zoom call, it's been your story being validated. Because some people think, Asha, we were all. Nobody was seen back then, or whatever. And it's thrown away then, and it's not given its validation. So for somebody to be heard, gosh, that must have been awful. That must have been sad or lonely. How did you feel about that? And just hear Jesus speak into that he knows what you went through, and bring them through that place, that it's no longer a stumbling block for them, or it's no longer something we react to.
or bury down.
Or buried, because that's what we do with things we don't like.
And what would you say to a Catholic? And I know lots of people, and we've all met people like this, and that's okay that they're like this, but what would you say to somebody who would say to you, that all sounds like bullshit? Like, really? And
So honest.
Yeah, it all sounds like bullshit. You just have to get on with it, and we don't all have the luxury of feeling sorry for ourselves.
It's not about feeling sorry for yourself, though.
Yeah, but
I know that's what people may say.
That's what people might say,
Yeah.
And that's what people, you're just making a big. And I'm not saying I'm saying this or I think this, but there's a huge population of Irish Catholics out there that are just saying, now you're getting a little bit carried away. You just need to pull up your big girl blouse and pull up your trousers and, wear your long pants and just get on with it and just get through it. Chin up.
Okay, can I
head
put
down, bum up.
Okay, can I put it another way? Hearts are they're like rocks, and we put them in a sack, and we carry them wherever we go. Like, you can imagine if I had a rucksack on here and I have unresolved stuff with my parents, unresolved stuff with the teacher, which I did have with the teacher, and all of that. And so no matter where you go, they're with you. So you have a choice to make. Do you want to carry this bag of rocks with you for the rest of your life? And it will affect every relationship you're in no matter if you don't resolve it. So the choice is, do I want rid of it, or do I carry it? And sometimes, we like the bag of rocks.
It's
Feel sorry for
identity.
ourselves. Yeah, and it's rubbish. It's not rubbish. It's pitiful. Because you would not
We're a
choose.
victim. We can be a victim with our bag of rocks.
You wouldn't choose.
We don't have to deal with our stuff then if we're
absolutely.
Yeah. So if anybody's listening to this or watching this and actually find themselves being, having a reaction like that which I've just described, I would encourage them to actually, really reflect on the possibility that they could actually be helped by exposing themselves to something like Little Way Healing Ministry. I know something that we've been exposed to as well. And this is a good segue a good on-ramp into the purpose of the podcast is really marriage parenting. And so much of what we do in parenting is that bag of rocks, for ourselves, because we can't help but actually
Fill the bag
for our kids.
I know.
But I don't mean that. Let's pare back. We all have stuff. If we ain't dealing with our stuff, we're going to give it to our kids. And this is why we started off talking about formation, in terms of parenting. We both, Sheena and myself, have met all your kids, I think. Yeah, we have met them all at some stage. And we're very impressed by them. They're really good people.
They're fine men and women, as Nina Johnson would say.
Yeah. And it's something that, the Lord can bless you. But generally speaking, our kids will turn out like ourselves, and it's tell us about parenting, not about skills. Like what's like, say you were to say, and we don't have to break them all down in a sentence, but if you were to actually, if people came away from this podcast and from this conversation and said, okay, there's one thing that I'm going to implement in my marriage or in my parenting that will help me parent my kids better, that's good. But say we give them 3 things that they, and they can choose whichever one it is.
Start with one.
Can I come in here and say, just before go any further, it may sound like we are such perfect people, it's incredible. I am who I am today because serious pain and deprivation in my life as a young person. No question about that. And I'm not speaking from and Mary can speak if she wants to say anything on this. I'm not speaking from somebody who just sailed through life. I didn't. I was bruised black and blue. I really was. And for me, it was that pain and the loneliness in my teenage years, and I really mean real loneliness, that I began to question life. And I didn't want the life that I saw around me, particularly with my father. And I yearned to be happy. And I just didn't want to make a mistake. My biggest fear, I think, was I would end up in a bad marriage, make a bad mistake. And I was so scared of moving into my 20s. I remember I went to London when I was 18, and I remember I worked in a bar for a year, and then I worked on a building site, and I was driving a van one day, and I didn't know where my life was going. I saw it as dark, and I was driving a van, and I said, just take that tree now, just wrap this van around it. I was that low. And it was only after coming back and going to college in Ireland, and because somebody knocked on my door, and through that the light of Christ came into my life, I wouldn't be here today. I certainly would not have 5 children. So I just want to put that out there, that God for some reason put his finger down on me and drew me out of the mire and set me on the mountain. And I've climbed that mountain, and it's a great view. It's a great view.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, I would say, if people have the impression that your life is perfect, what would you say to that?
It's pretty good.
That's not the answer I was expecting. But do you know what?
Look, we've Mary needs to talk more on this. We've raised 5 children, and the nest is empty, more or less now. And we're at the stage where we don't look at our children's lives and have any regret. They're all in fantastic situations. They all have faith in God, a real faith in God. And that's part from us. I don't know what percentage you'd say. How much more was the environment, the people that they surrounded themselves, and through the grace of God. What was your question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically, could you give any one piece of advice to people out there, or something that you did that you felt was fundamental in how your kids have turned out?
I think we had to be intentional.
Yes.
We didn't have, even now, you have net, and you can expose young teenage, and your family has been exposed to it. There wasn't a lot going for us back then, and that's why community was essential for us, that we had other people. I remember when our eldest girl was about 15, she said, I can't wait till I'm 18 and getting out of here. And we thought, oh gosh, okay, what are we going to do now?
We were an odd family for her, and which is fair enough.
Oh, I see.
We were the religious ones. Nobody else in our class she could identify. The only people were the people next door that moved next door to us.
But they were younger.
They were, slightly older.
Okay.
But not necessarily best of buddies. They did get to do things together. But they were just as weird as us in that sense. So we thought and we prayed on it, and what we decided to do was to send her to a similar community, a sister community in London. They were looking for people to babysit, and there were adults going, and they were asking, and I found this out, and I thought this would be great for her to go into school on Monday. And what did you do for the weekend? I was in London, and she probably wouldn't give the detail of why she was in London, but that would look good. And so we did that, and then we continued to do that. She went to Spain, she went to Glasgow, where there are other communities. We really had to be one step ahead and try to do things that were just different. We have a good relationship, thanks be to God, with all our kids, but we again worked on that.
I think it's sending your kids out from your family. They do experience, formation, all of that, but when we let them out there, and they come back that bit different. And there's so many camps around Ireland now, with Camp Veritas, what the Friars of Renewal are doing, Home of the Mother, and
U2000 festivals.
All of that. But particularly for the younger, I'd say from 12, 13 upwards, I remember saying to Mary, I'd sell our house to keep our kids in their faith, because it's not just about faith, it's about the quality of life they will have, and as well as that they'll be disciples themselves.
When I turned 50 just the other day, my kids gave me a jar, and inside it were wrapped up little scrolls, and on it was all the things we love about you, and the things that were in there were what I did with them. It was most all of them, the fun things. The day you came in and brought me out, we did this in school when there was programs in there we didn't want. We arranged for them to be in later, that program that would be first class, so that I would take them out for a coffee, or when it was the day after their junior cert, when they go on and do all sorts of things, we went off to a hotel and we stayed the night, and we were always being intentional, but it was always fun. Almost every one of them were the fun things that you did with us.
There's fundamental things, I think, in being able to apologize to your kids when you're wrong, and because they learn to apologize to one another because they've seen it, and I think also the relationship of the couple is paramount. We've come across this so many times. It's like the security the kids are carried, it's the hammock, which is the love and the respect between husband and wife. And I think one thing, we decided not to let the sun set in our anger, but we never talked about conflict, but we never had a row in front of our children. And it's not that we're perfect. We had plenty of discussion where we were disagreeing with one another.
In front of the kids?
No, never. We never had a row in front of the kids.
Okay.
And
would you have had it, like, say you said something and Mary disagreed with you? It wasn't an emotional...
No.
We would never have undermined one another to the kids.
Okay,
either.
in front of the kids?
No, never, ever. And,
okay, wow.
And having said that, I certainly would be maybe upset, and as I got older, I would maybe get a little note under my door, Mum, I love you, hope you're okay.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. So they picked up. They're all very, you can't get away with much in that sense, which is a lovely gift. I think the one thing is having a fun, not putting any seriousness but when you do bring the serious topic in, then they know we really are serious.
You know, when we get married and we decide to have children, please God, we don't get a manual, right? And we're not told this is how you're supposed to raise your kids. And the key is intentional parenting. And unless we have other people to tell us how to do it, we're really kind of shooting in the dark, you know? And I think it's for us, we've been so blessed to have couples like you in our lives. We also have, when we started off, we had Kathy and Dermot O'Hara, friends of ours in town, and they taught us an awful lot about how to bring our kids up, and you know, it's simple things like teaching your kids, you know, when they meet someone to say hello
and look them
in the eye, and if they say, "Hello, Martin, how are you?" that the kid would respond and say, "I'm very well, thank you, Martin, and how are you?" Like, so simple, and yet we're not told that that's what you're supposed to do. And it's not for our benefit, it's for the child's benefit, you know.
Course, yeah.
Like, it's very difficult to warm to a child who goes, if you say hello to them, you know.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, really it's wonderful that you have had that community behind you, and you know.
And our kids used it against us in one sense, because the family we had next door, they would say, well, they do this. And I said, well, they're not us. So we're only going to be accountable for our own family.
Yes.
So there's whereas the intentionality, and we are a community that support each other, we don't all do the same thing.
Yeah.
So we're only responsible for our own family.
Yeah, and I think the thing in rearing kids is you need to have real fun together. And I know that's something you've done. You've done mad holidays, traveling across Europe and doing wild things. And we need to do things like that. We need to be half mad at times, really, you know, to not to be so straight-laced. Interesting, I heard a priest talk recently about, you know, you can say a child is misbehaving, and said sometimes some parents can let their kids run riot, and you get very annoyed with them. And this was a priest who would be quite experienced in ministry. And he said, it's interesting. I've observed families who are very strict with their children, and they're very prim and proper. And he said, as teenagers, there's an explosion. And you see these other kids that were wild. And he said they had a better understanding that they were totally loved by their parents. And I thought that was interesting. Because we all can admire the very well-behaved child.
Well-dressed. Looks good.
Yeah.
Doesn't answer the parents'
clean
back.
face.
Yeah.
No snots running down the nose.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, parenting has changed hugely from when we were parenting too. You know, there were, I think now there's a lot of children's rights and all
no,
of
but
that.
even forgetting that though, Mary, there may be children's rights. But I think I see our kids doing a better job than we did.
Yeah, I see that too. I see that they have, and no more than we didn't get it growing up. So it wasn't like we leaned in on what we were taught. It was by the grace of God and our prayer and asking, what do we do? And praying together about situations that led us to do the parenting we did.
But also, isn't it common sense that if you hurt a child or speak harshly to a child, you need, before God, to respond and to apologise to that child? I know we say we don't have a manual, but I see a young father holding his child and the child drooling down here only this evening. And I'm saying, that guy didn't know how to hold a child a year ago. And look at him now. A lot of it comes to it. Yeah, we
Naturally.
don't. Yeah, I think a lot of it does come. But I think, see, in the olden days, you had the grandparents, or you had the village. You had the person to come and help the woman with breastfeeding or whatever, to encourage them. Often younger families can be isolated. Like we've 2 daughters married in Germany, for instance. Now we visit. But compared to being here, you cannot give the same support. No. But hopefully there is some older person there for them. That's what I would say. It's
And I would like to push back on the whole, you guys didn't have anything to go on. Like, you had the basic humanity. You had two parents, and albeit, and I want you to push back on me as well when I say this to you, like, both of you and both of us had two parents. The reality for a lot of parents now coming into, and they want, they've had an experience of faith, or they want to do something that they mightn't have had themselves. They want to do better for their kids than they've experienced growing up. A lot of them haven't even had two parents. There may be one parent, but that in itself, they can still draw off positive elements of their own upbringing, in that the love that they experienced from that one parent or a grandparent or whatever, to actually bring into all the one of the things I've learned is that for those that have grown up fatherless, or really had a difficult experience of fatherhood in their own lives, the Lord blesses in abundance. Like, for example, I'm thinking of you, Martin. I've known you 12 years at this stage, and I see the gifting that he has given you, and I know your story. There's much more to it than what you're telling at this table. He has turned your brokenness and your woundedness into holy wounds, and you've brought them into the light. So whatever experience you have had, and whatever experience people who are listening to this, who mightn't have even had as good an experience growing up as you've had, and it mightn't have been easy for you, God, if we let him, he will bless us, and he will turn our own brokenness into beauty and into something that we can give to our children and to the next generation. And if we just let him, and the father fathers the fatherless, like, if we've had a difficult experience growing up and there's a gap there, if we allow God into that space, he will, and we need to do the hard work as well. But grace, it's pure grace, not merit. But he will give us what we need.
But it can be very tough if you've had a bad relationship with your father, because you project that onto God. And I know when I came to faith first, I didn't want to know about God the Father. It was the guy on the cross who suffered. And in some sense, I'm not saying I was like Christ on the cross, or the church was, to me, this big institution that I didn't like. And I know it was just God guiding me. It was, who was the guy on the cross? Did he come? And if he did, what is it to me? And that's where I began. And gradually, the father wound was dealt with, so that I could experience God the Father as a loving father. But that can be a major stumbling block for people. And unless we find a way in there, if you're comfortable with Jesus, the rugged guy who got camel manure in his feet when he walked the roads and stuff, he was a rugged man, and he had the ability to make a whip when he saw things wrong in the temple and whip people, upturn the tables. Or he could take a child on his knee and say, hey, let the children come to me. So there was that intimacy. So that's the guy. I feel that for anyone who was a father wound, this is the guy you got to know first. And then he introduced you to his mother, to his father, and you get the whole experience of the family of God, which is Mary, our mother. If we're denying Mary as mother, we're being raised as with one parent. If we're just seeing
as
God
an
the
orphan,
Father,
essentially,
we need to see the whole thing.
We're a family.
Yeah.
Even the Trinity is a family.
Yeah.
And the love between the Father and the Son,
exactly,
and it's not a formulaic situation. It's a real loving relationship.
Sister Miriam Heitland did. I'm not sure if it was on the Abiding Together podcast or something she did herself, but it was a pre-Christmas recording, and she talked a lot about the father wound or the mother wound, and the pressure at Christmas time for everything to be perfect, and it's not often that way. And we go back to being the child we were at home at Christmas. But she basically said that if things weren't great at home, that the Lord has sent people into our lives who have been like a father figure or a mother figure, and to look at those people as examples how to live your life.
That's great.
And even if those people have not been sent to you, the Holy Family, Joseph and Mary, you know, ask them to father you or mother you, you know, that we're not orphaned. We haven't been left alone.
Well, yeah.
Beautiful.
That is.
I met a lady recently who was an orphan and was raised in an orphanage. She didn't know her parents, and she's now almost 80. And she's the most remarkable story. And what she said to me, I had no mother, but I used to throw myself into the arms of Mary and tell her to comfort me. Oh, her story is incredible. But I thought of that. She said, and I'm not bitter, she said, because I had Mary as my mother. Mm-hmm. And it was, wow. Yeah, that woman had everything too.
Relationship and family again. I mean, the family is the domestic church. Mm-hmm. We are our people. And I think what I see in mothers with young children need this to be secure. That's one of the first needs, to feel secure. And if a child needs to be able to say, can I have this? Can I have that? Can I go there? Because they know, I have somebody that's going to hold back. I can lean as far as I want, and they will not let me go into territory I shouldn't be. And what often happens, and this is where the subtlety of the evil one comes in, the worn down mother gives in and says, oh, you know, after 5 times, no, you can't, you won't, whatever it is. And then, okay, I think that is just the greatest suffering to see of what you're doing to that child. So you have to think and be intentional about your response before you say it. And that to me would be, it's my own, it's, you know, I'm speaking from experience too.
Yeah, totally relate.
It's that.
And self-care is really important so that you're not worn down to that point of not,
that's right.
You know, not being the parent that you want to be.
Yeah.
One of our kids said recently, and this is one of our younger kids, if you don't rear your kids, you will rear your grandkids. Rear your kids and you won't have to rear your grandkids. Mm-hmm. I'm like, what? Where did you hear that? And why are you repeating that? Yeah.
They see.
Yeah, one of our kids said once, a bit of tongue in cheek, she said, it was actually our 25th anniversary. We had a party in the house, and she said, you know, there is a saying, if the parents are good, the kids will raise themselves.
So I think this is great. This has been a great conversation, but I'd love to get you guys back in a couple of months to talk about marriage. You know, like this has mostly been about parenting, but something you did say, you know, was, Martin, you were saying like the relationship between the two of you. Like we've had a few couples come to us looking for, you know, advice about, you know, what can we do more to raise our kids better, and you know, we've pointed back to that. Look after yourselves, you know, and that's, if the kids see that you're good and you're strong and you have a loving relationship, that's security.
Yeah, and that age of 6.
I think we'll probably wind up now.
And but we have a good question.
One of the questions we ask all our guests is, you know, is there something that the Lord has revealed to you recently that you would like to share with people, or have you read something recently that's been, you know, like an aha moment for you, or and I can go first, and then you'll get an idea of where we're going.
Can we say the same thing as you?
No. But yeah, like we're back to being vulnerable here, you know. I'm reading a book at the moment, and it's about the writings. It's based on the writings of Saint Therese of Lisieux, but it's written by a French priest who gave retreats on her writings, and it's like extracts from his talks. And now the stuff I've read, I've heard before, but it was for such a time as this that I could actually hear it and take it into my heart. But he talked about how, you know, the thoughts, like what you talked about earlier, Mary, about the thoughts that are in your head, and like deep down somewhere in me, I thought whenever I had a negative thought or, a prideful thought that I'm intrinsically actually bad, or even though I strive to be good and I strive to know the Lord and I strive to pray and all the things, that if I have those thoughts, I must actually be really bad. And he was articulated that, no, I'm human in nature. So part of my nature is to be fallen. It's what I do with those thoughts. And it was like a weight was lifted off me that, and I know when I shared it to Tony, it was like, are you only figuring that out now?
I didn't say that, but
I know,
you
but
could read my face.
Yeah, like, and I've shared it with some other people, and they've also been like, wow, are you actually only figuring that out now? But it's so profound, I feel like it was worth sharing today. So there you go. That's my little tuppence.
Thank you, Sheena. I think what the Lord is doing in my life is, I got the sense a few times recently to actually stop and enjoy his love. And let's just let that sit in silence for a few seconds. For me to enjoy his love of me. And then it was, do you know what? He actually likes me. And he enjoys me. And he thinks I'm a fine man.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That is profound.
Off you go, Mary.
No pressure.
What's the Lord saying? For me, it's a little bit, somewhat like you said. I love doing. I'm a doer. And recently the Lord says, the story of Martha and Mary. And I always thought, well, I'm Mary, sitting at the Lord's feet, but I'm not. I'm a Martha. But in the last while, and I'm how long is that? Maybe last 5-6 months, that I can't do as much as I used to do. And it takes me longer to do the things I really used to do very quickly. And I want to have a lot more energy than I do. And I felt he's saying, because I would like to get up early in the morning and I'd have the prayer time and go to Mass and all of these things. I'm kind of racing through and ticking boxes. And for a while there, he said, but I don't want you to do any of that. I really want you to, and it's hard. It was hard. I tried one day just to sit outside with my book. Oh gosh, it's Tuesday afternoon, and surely I should be ironing or something, or taking one of the grandchildren because I have a couple of hours off. And it's no. So it's the self-care, but it's stopping to say, I'm okay with you doing nothing. Mm-hmm. If you think doing makes me say, isn't she great? And that's my daughter. It's the same kind of messages you've heard. And I'm struggling with it because the old voices was, doing is the good thing. You should be doing something. You shouldn't sit. When you sit, idle, devil finds work for idle hands. That was a huge one spoken into my life. So I had to do a little bit of renouncing those kind of lies. And still, it's an ongoing thing for me. I haven't come through and sat at the Lord's feet as easily. But that's
Thank you.
I think that's
Thanks, Mary.
And for me, I'm reminded of something a friend of mine said to me years and years ago. God rest her. She said, if something comes to your mind, if it's to write a card, make a phone call to somebody, do it. Because if you don't, it will be lost forever. And I was having a prayer time during the week, and in the middle of it, this guy came to mind, and I decided I would message him. And it turned out it was a very significant birthday that I knew nothing about. He's not in this country. And I said a few things to him, and he came back to me and was over and back for a few things. And I thought, for me this week is hearing the voice of God. Now that sounds awfully pious. It's like...
Were you levitating when you heard this?
It's like God he's aware we're human and we live in this world, and he put thoughts into our mind at times, and he's prompting us to respond. Mm-hmm. And I thought, no, I could have let that go and have just thought it was only when it turned out with what the guy returned to me, I realized, hey, that was actually God. That wasn't you. Yeah. He was using you. And so that's for me to be, how much I miss, I don't know. I really don't know. Mm. But so it's to be fine-tuned in that. And unless one spends a bit of time in prayer, I don't think we're going to hear his voice. Mm-hmm. Now, we can hear it in loads of places. We could be at work, in a shop or whatever, but you feel something. But I love that idea. If somebody comes to your heart, mm-hmm. maybe they need a bit of comfort, encouragement today, just do something. So that was a huge thing for me this week. Simple.
Thanks, Martin.
As that.
Much appreciated. Well, we draw it to a close there, and thank you so much for your time and your love and your friendship.
And your friendship too. It's always good for us we were looking forward to coming here and what we've done over the years. So thank you for what you're doing.
Well, this house, the house, I love coming into it. And I said this before, okay, you're both involved in Net Ministries, and you are mostly Tony, but Sheena is the Aga of Net Ministries, where so much warmth and beautiful food comes from through her and everything. Yeah. So it's just great to be here with you, and well, just great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share and subscribe. It's free. Share with your family and friends. Enjoy.